Imagine surviving alone in one of the most remote places on Earth. For months, your only company is the wind, the wildlife, and the growing fear that nobody is coming back for you. Then one afternoon, you hear it. An airplane. It circles directly above your camp. You wave desperately. It sees you. It circles again. You smile. Because after weeks of wondering whether anyone even knows you're alive, you're finally going home. But the plane never lands. Instead, it banks away and disappears beyond the mountains. For days, you convince yourself it will return. It never does. Weeks later, investigators uncovered a detail so disturbing that it changed the entire story. The pilot hadn't ignored the stranded man. He believed he didn't need saving, because without saying a single word, the man had accidentally told his rescue plane, "I'm okay." This isn't just a survival story. It's the story of how a handful of ordinary assumptions became a death sentence, and why the most dangerous mistake you'll ever make might be the one you never realize you've already made. Here at Mr. Clue, we uncover the mysteries that stay with you long after the story ends. So, if you're drawn to the unexplained, the unsettling, and the clues most people overlook, subscribe, because every mystery leaves a clue. Now, let's go back to the moment Carl McCunn believed he had planned for everything, except the one thing that would decide whether he ever made it home. There are mistakes you survive. There are mistakes you regret. And then there are the mistakes you never realize you've made, until there's no one left to warn you. In 1981, one man traveled into one of the most remote wildernesses on Earth. Months later, investigators would discover that the greatest danger he faced wasn't a predator, it wasn't the freezing cold, and it wasn't starvation. It was a simple assumption. The Brooks Range in northern Alaska is vast enough to make a person feel invisible. Endless mountains, frozen lakes, and dense wilderness stretch for hundreds of miles. In some places, you could stand completely alone, knowing the nearest human being might be farther away than you could ever hope to walk. Out there, nature doesn't hunt you. It simply doesn't notice you're there. And if something goes wrong, there may be no one to hear you. Would you willingly step into a place where your survival depends on someone remembering you're waiting? For Carl McCunn, the answer was yes. At 34 years old, Carl wasn't an inexperienced adventurer chasing danger. He was a wildlife photographer who had spent years exploring Alaska's unforgiving backcountry. He had already lived for months in the Brooks Range before, photographing caribou, wolves, birds, and the untouched wilderness few people would ever witness firsthand. To him, this wasn't reckless, it was home. So when he planned another 5-month photography expedition in the spring of 1981, he prepared with the confidence of someone who believed experience could overcome almost anything. He packed over 1,400 pounds of supplies, hundreds of rolls of film, rifles, a shotgun, enough food to last for months. Everything had been carefully planned, everything, except the one part of the journey that would ultimately decide whether he ever made it home. By late August, Carl had stopped expecting to hear anything except the wind. Every morning looked the same. Every evening ended the same way. Another day survived, another day forgotten. Then, the silence broke. At first, he wasn't sure he had heard it correctly. A faint rumble echoed through the mountains. He froze. Then he looked up. Far above the lake, a small airplane emerged from the horizon. For weeks, Carl had imagined this exact moment. Now it was happening. He dropped everything and sprinted toward his camp, grabbing the bright orange cover from his sleeping bag, the most visible thing he owned. As the aircraft approached, he swung it wildly above his head, again and again. The pilot circled once, then twice. There was no doubt anymore. The plane had seen him. For the first time in weeks, Carl allowed himself to believe he was going home. Then he noticed something. The aircraft had wheels, not floats. It couldn't land on the lake. His excitement drained away almost instantly. Exhausted, frustrated, and unable to understand why help had arrived without actually rescuing him, Carl lowered the orange cover. As the plane banked for another pass, he raised one hand to shoulder height and shook his fist toward the sky. It wasn't a signal. It wasn't planned. Just the exhausted reaction of a man whose hope had been ripped away for the second time. The airplane completed one final circle, then disappeared beyond the mountains. Carl stood there long after the engine noise had faded. He told himself the pilot would return with another aircraft, or send help, or tell someone exactly where he was. Then, almost as an afterthought, he reached for a small survival card that explained emergency signals to passing aircraft. One illustration made his stomach drop. The gesture he had just made didn't mean, "come back." It meant, "everything is okay." And with that single misunderstanding, Carl may have unknowingly sent away the only rescue he would ever see. When the sound of the airplane finally disappeared, the silence returned. Only this time, it felt different. Carl no longer waited for tomorrow with the same hope. His own diary reveals that he blamed himself for what had happened. After checking his survival card and realizing what the raised fist actually meant, he became convinced that he had unknowingly thrown away his best chance of rescue. Whether that was truly his last opportunity is impossible to know, but from that day forward, he wrote like a man who believed it was. His food disappeared one meal at a time, first the rice, then the beans. Soon, even the emergency supplies were gone. To quiet the emptiness in his stomach, Carl swallowed handfuls of spices, crushed red pepper, thyme, salt. When there was nothing left to season, he began eating the rabbit heads he had once used as bait. Eventually, even tree bark became food. Winter arrived without asking permission. The lake froze, snow buried the landscape. Frostbite slowly stole the use of his hands, the same hands that set traps, loaded rifles, and held the camera he had carried into the wilderness to capture its beauty. His diary entries changed. They stopped sounding like the journal of an adventurer. They became the thoughts of a man trying to outlast a world that no longer cared whether he did. He dreamed about peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, banana pudding, cheesecake, simple meals that most people never think twice about. Then, one day, he wrote that he didn't feel hungry anymore, just tired. According to medical understanding, that can happen in the final stages of starvation, when exhaustion begins to replace the body's constant demand for food. Sometime in December, Carl made one final fire. He wrote letters to his father. He explained how he wanted his photographs developed. He asked that whoever found him could keep his rifle and shotgun. Then he wrote one last sentence. "They say it doesn't hurt." Weeks passed before anyone realized Carl hadn't returned. When state troopers finally reached his camp in early February 1982, they found his tent zipped shut against a world that had long since frozen around it. Inside was Carl McCunn, his diary, and nearly 100 pages documenting day by day how confidence became uncertainty, uncertainty became hope, hope became silence. The investigation that followed revealed no single catastrophic mistake. Instead, it uncovered something far more unsettling: a forgotten conversation, an unclear pickup plan, a misunderstood hand signal, a father told not to worry, friends who assumed he was already home, a pilot who genuinely believed the man below him was safe. The wilderness never deceived Carl. The cold never lied. Hunger never lied. What doomed him was something far more ordinary, a chain of assumptions. Because sometimes, the most dangerous clue isn't the one you fail to notice. It's the one everyone thinks they already understand. Carl McCunn didn't lose his life because he was unprepared. He packed enough food for months. He brought weapons, medical supplies, survival gear. He knew the wilderness. In many ways, he did everything right. And that's what makes this story so unsettling. Because the mistake that cost him his life wasn't made in the Alaskan wilderness. It happened long before he ever arrived. It lived in a conversation, an assumption, a gesture, something so ordinary that nobody thought to question it. Would you have? Right now, someone probably knows where you are. But do they know when to worry? Do they know exactly when you're supposed to come home? Or have you simply assumed they do? Carl's story has often been called a tragedy of survival. But maybe that's not what it really is. Maybe it's a story about communication, about certainty, about how easily people can believe they're understood when they aren't. Every mystery leaves a clue. Carl left hundreds. The heartbreaking part is that the one clue that mattered most was the one everyone misunderstood. Some clues are found. Others find you. If this is the kind of story that stays with you long after the video ends, that's exactly what this channel is built for. Subscribe and make sure the next clue doesn't slip past you either. Because somewhere out there, another story is waiting to be misunderstood.